Welcome to Sounds of Resistance YouTube channel. The Russian army, exhausted by the Ukrainian war, is trying to heal its wounds. Russia's soldiers, stunned by the full range of the Ukrainian heroes, no longer want to fight. After the heroes of the Ukrainian armed forces completely liberated Liman in the Donetsk region, they raided further inland and now advanced 20 kilometers to the east of Liman. At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces today intensified the all-out counterattack in Kherson and made serious gains. While the cracks in the Russian army continued to worry the Kremlin administration and Vladimir Putin, Zelensky's soldiers showed their strength in Liman. With Ukraine's victory in Liman, the mobilization decision of Russian leader Vladimir Putin fell into a dysfunctional position. Great anxiety and panic gripped Putin's close allies, Wagner patron Yevgeny Prigozhin and Chechnya leader Ramzan Kadyrov. They were horrified by the achievements of Ukraine. The Russian leader was considering closing the gap in his army with the mobilization decision he announced. But instead of closing the gap in the Russian army, Putin caused greater casualties. The Russian forces were disgraced in the city of Liman with nearly 6,000 Russian soldiers. It is not an easy number to speak of. We are talking about almost 2 regiments of Russian soldiers. Ukrainian heroes managed to defeat these 6,000 Russian soldiers in Liman. Russian soldiers at the Liman base, fleeing Ukraine's siege, pleaded with the Ukrainian armed forces for safe evacuation. However, the noble army of Ukraine, which did not allow the Russians to pass, continued its attacks until they threw the Russian troops in this region from the border of the city with cries of either independence or death. The Russian troops in Liman, which fell into a small position in the world political arena, lost a lot as a result of this operation. Now let's take a look behind the scenes of the Liman disaster. It is claimed that most of the soldiers of the Russian base in the city of Liman are made up of voluntary Russian citizens. The fact that the giant Russian regiment of 6,000 soldiers suffered serious losses in Liman is due to the very low military experience of the Russian volunteer citizens in this region. Colonel Alexander Lapin, Liman's defense chief, is blamed for the destruction of 6,000 Russian soldiers. Here too we see how Russian leader Vladimir Putin threw the responsibility off. How does the Russian leader who decides, manages the operations and plans the next step manage to pass the responsibility of it to someone else when there are losses? This is one of the most frequently asked questions. A victim is determined for each defeat of the Russian army, which is surrounded on all sides. You may remember that the former Russian Deputy Defense Minister Bulgakov was dismissed by Putin when the casualties of the Russian army were at the peak. While everyone was waiting for an explanation from the Russian leader, the military commander Bulgakov, who had the highest military rank after Putin, was wasted by the Russian leader. The Russian administration now sets its strategy towards avoiding responsibilities. Since no one in Russia bothered to explain why the situation was moving in a negative direction, outside interventions began to increase in this regard. Chechnya leader Ramzan Kadyrov, believed to be Putin's adopted son, made shocking statements about the failure picture in Russia. Chechen leader Kadyrov, who continued his ultimatum, stated that the order in Russia will not continue like this, and that if something is not done, the war will be seriously risked. Kadyrov, who warned the Russian leader about this issue, had the audacity to state that Russia should now use nuclear power. Ramzan Kadyrov, who has no qualifications other than the use of regime of fear and terror in the political sense, seemed to be telling Putin what to do with his statements that shocked the world agenda. Giving advice to his spiritual father, Kadyrov emphasized that Russia had to do this in order to win the war. As it can be understood from these statements, the Chechen leader Kadyrov started not to hide his criticisms while continuing his political henchmen. The Ukrainian army placed the Russians in such a helpless position that the Russian administration and Russia's tongues, Kadyrov, lined up to play all the remaining cards. How much can this behavior, which we're accustomed to from the Russian administration, change the course of the war? But the issue of the use of nuclear weapons poses a threat to all countries of the world. Despite the fact that the US government and NATO-allied countries have repeatedly condemned Russia on this issue, and mentioned that its sanctions will be heavy. The nuclear issue in Russia occasionally appears as a blackmail material. Whenever Russia is in a deadlock, it makes a show of strength with its nuclear weapons. Ramzan Kadyrov, who is now involved in nuclear issues, also highly criticized the mobilization decision announced in Russia. Kadyrov emphasized that Russia was a little late in this mobilization decision, and mobilization practices had been started in Chechnya for a long time. Ramzan Kadyrov, who takes it as a hobby to interfere in Russia's internal affairs, actually humiliates Russian leader Vladimir Putin with this approach. Ramzan Kadyrov, who managed to take away the right to speak and decide from the Russian leader, seems to be much more active than Putin on the Ukraine-Russia war. Leader Putin, on the other hand, made threatening statements about the use of nuclear weapons from time to time, just like the Chechen leader Kadyrov. Vladimir Putin, who continued his blackmail policies regarding Russian natural gas for a certain period of time, eased the energy sanctions he had imposed on Germany. If the Russian leader, who was compelled to do so for the cost of the war resources, continues to take radical decisions in this way, it would not be surprised for Russia to face serious consequences. During the war, the Russian economy was perhaps the most affected area by the defeats. The socio-economic level of well-being of the Russian people is crawling on the ground. Russia, which has been exposed to high inflation due to the Ukraine-Russia war, has difficulties in finding financial resources for war materials. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, unable to find any solution to this issue, compels Russian soldiers currently in Ukraine to use all Soviet-era weapons. In this imperative, the role of Ukrainian heroes is quite large. Most recently, the heroic army of Ukraine had recaptured the city of Liman and cut off Russia's most important logistics route. The Russian army, which is currently having many problems with military shipments, lost the city of Liman and fell into a desperate situation. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, seems much more concerned about Russian citizens being mobilized than the professional soldiers currently fighting in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, who sent the mobilized Russian citizens to Ukraine group by group, continues to send Russian citizens to Ukraine, even though he is incapable of even providing a buffer to his volunteers. More than 300,000 Russian citizens selected to fight in Ukraine and sent to the battlefield could not go beyond serving as pawns to leader Vladimir Putin's narcissistic plans. While the morale of even professional soldiers in the Russian army is low due to the Ukraine-Russia war, the impact of the soldiers coming to Ukraine with the mobilization decision announced by Putin is eagerly awaited. The last time we witnessed that these volunteer mobilized soldiers in the city of Liman did not work, but Vladimir Putin still insists on this attitude. Immediately after Putin announced the mobilization, Ukrainian Defense Minister Shoigu stated that they were planning to increase the number of expedition, which currently has 300,000 volunteers, to 1 million. It seems very difficult for Russia to reach this figure at the moment. Because the vast majority of Russian citizens do not want to go to Ukraine like Russian soldiers, especially after the mobilization decision of Russian leader Putin, thousands of Russian citizens left their country. We think that Putin, who has failed in mobilization, will try every way to win, and will not give up his stance even though his methods used by the Russian leader are illegal and war crimes. See you again with hot developments. Stay cool for now. Thanks for watching.